All right, so this is going to be another video about vertical asymptotes, and it's going to basically be another 5 example problems to kind of, again, explain this concept a little bit more detail. All right, so number 6, it says, what are the vertical asymptote or asymptotes for the following? So for 6, you're basically looking for what x value would cause the denominator to be 0. So we're going to set the denominator equal to 0 and solve. And you should end up with negative 3/2 for your answer. And then what you're going to want to do is make sure that it does not cause a 0 over 0, because if it was 0 over 0, it would be a whole. In this case, if you plugged in the negative 3 over 2 to the top and the bottom, it would be a non-zero over 0. So that would be your answer for number 6. Okay, number 7 is a little bit tricky in that you have to set the denominator equal to 0 again. But this time, in order to solve this, you would need quadratic formula because you have a quadratic equation here. If you wanted to, you could also factor it, but I'm going to use quadratic formula because that's what I tend to prefer. So it's going to be x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, which is 4 times 4 times negative 5, which is going to be negative 80. And then we're dividing this all by 8. Okay, now from here, this ends up being 144, so the square root of that is going to be 12, so it's negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 144, which again is 12. Divide this by 8 here, and you're going to end up with 4 over 8 and negative 20 over 8. So your two asymptotes, your two vertical asymptotes would be at x equals 1/2 and x equals negative 5 over 2. All right, the next one we are going to set the denominator equal to 0 again and solve. So we're going to add 9 to the other sides. You should get x squared equals 9 over 4. If you do the square root of this, you will get x is equal to plus or minus 3 over 2. And if you try to plug in 3 over 2 to the top part, you're not going to get a 0. So that means it definitely is a vertical asymptote and not a whole. Again, it is important to check to make sure you plug that back into the top to make sure it's not a 0 over 0 for the rational function when you evaluate it out. Okay, number 9. This one's pretty easy. You just set the denominator equal to 0, you get 0. So x equals 0. If you plugged it into the top, you would get negative 6. So it's not a 0 over 0, so that's actually the answer for that one. That's pretty easy. And the last one, we're going to set the denominator equal to 0 and solve this out. I'm going to use quadratic formula because it always works rather than wasting time with factoring. So it's going to be 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, which is 4 times 2, which is 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. The square root of all that, and then we're going to divide this by 4. Okay, the minus minus becomes a plus, and you end up with the square root of 49 there. So it's going to be 5 plus or minus 7 over 4. Okay, if you do the plus flavor of this, it's going to be 12 over 4, so that's 3. If you do the minus, it's going to be negative 2 over 4, which is negative 1/2. So your two answers for this one would be x equals 3 and x equals negative 1/2. But you do have to make sure that these don't result in a 0 over 0. So I'm going to test it out really quick by plugging 3 in for the first one, and you would not get 0. If you plug negative 1/2 in for the first one, then you would not get 0 as well. So these would be your two answers for the vertical asymptote. So that's 5 more examples involving finding vertical asymptotes. If you have any questions about anything in this video, let me know.